Welcome to the ESIP Information Technology and Operability reboot of the Rants and Raves series. I'm your host, I guess, Dave Blodgett. I've been kind of back to this position, this role after and I'm really excited to kind of re-engage in the IT&I committee and try to figure out where this group should go. In preparing for this session, I went back in time a ways and tried to find the genesis of the IT&I group. And there's some relics on the wiki that are interesting and telling from like 2013, 2014 era, I want to say. And I think this group actually started more like 2011, almost like long time ago. And it started with a series of talks that they called Rants and Raves, right? And I really like to feed off other people's energy. I'll just put it that way. And I think that's what I find compelling about this Rants and Raves idea. I think what other people are excited about, what other people want to talk about, is as good a place as any to meet people in the community. So I invited a few people from kind of people that are leaders in the community to give their rave or rant. And I say rave or rant because this isn't just ranting about things that we're frustrated about, right? This is potentially ranting and raving about things that we think everybody should care about, or things that we're excited to learn about, or big questions, or whatever it is, right? And so that's what I was hoping we could do quick here. Is I want to bring that spirit of rants and raves to the monthly call. And to do that, I think the best thing to do is kind of kick that off with a group of people from within the community that have a finger on the pulse of the community and can help us understand what topics are going to hit, what topics are people going to want to hear about and take part in. So we're going to start with a series of quickie 5-minute-ish talks. I'll let people introduce themselves quick and then run through their own slides if you got them, or just talk as a talking head on our screens. And after that, I've got a series of kind of discussion questions. I basically am hoping to draw out ideas to build an agenda for the year for our monthly calls. And I'm also very curious to hear if this committee should be doing something other than monthly calls. I've certainly felt like there was an argument to be made for something a little more tangible in terms of being productive than just getting together and sharing ideas. I don't want to say just, I guess. I wonder if people have ideas that could be more impactful than a series of webinars. So unless there's pressing questions, I think we should jump in, and I'd pass it to Mike to take it from here.
Pause in a second to hear if there's pressing questions before I start sharing, but yeah, thanks. So hi everyone, I'm Mike. I'm the fellow for this cluster for this year, and also currently a PhD student at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And I'm going to start off with a rave with good vibes only, talking about tools that have made my life a lot better in the past year and how I structure when I'm doing scientific analyses, when I'm doing standard workflows, things that have made it a lot easier to write efficient and reproducible workflows. And to talk about how these tools help, I think I want to start off talking about a grand theory of analysis workflows, which is my way of saying that I think that if you're doing any sort of scientific analysis that's more than a little bit complex, you sort of fall into one of a few ways of actually structuring that work. The first one is that you have a bunch of different atomic scripts. So individual pieces of code that take some input, do some processing, save some output. And this is, a really natural way to structure any sort of analysis that you do. It's how a lot of good science gets done. But there's a challenge with this sort of approach to structuring a workflow, which is that probably some of these scripts depend on the outputs of other scripts. There's some amount of codependency between your elements here, which is a challenge because it means that if you make changes to your input data or to any of your processing scripts, then you have to manually remember what order things need to be run in order to update all of your results. That means that you need to keep your entire dependency tree in your head, which is difficult and a really easy way for errors to creep into your results. It's a really easy way to make it hard to reproduce what you actually did because you don't have an obvious way to flow through all of these files. Now, to work around that, I know a lot of other people will do things like write shell scripts that run each of these scripts in a set order, which gets around this issue, but forces you to understand your dependency graph well enough that you can write down what order things need to get run in, but also requires you now to maintain this separate file at the same time as all of your other actual analysis and workhorse scripts, which is challenging. And so for that reason, I and a lot of other people tend to work more in notebooks, where instead of separating things into code files, you're separating things into chunks. The idea here is that you've forced your dependency graph to be strictly linear. Things run from top to bottom. If you run the entire notebook, everything gets updated. You can't have any results that are out of date, which is fantastic. It does really solve that problem with having individual scripts, but introduces a new problem, which is that if you have like a graph or a table or something at the bottom here that only depends on one or two pieces further up, well, to regenerate that graph or table, you have to either run the entire notebook, which can take a really long time and isn't super efficient, or you have to interactively go through and run only the pieces that need to be run, which requires you to keep that dependency graph in your mind again and reintroduces that opportunity for error. Still, this was an improvement over files in my experience, and so I've been doing notebook-based stuff up until last year when I discovered a new tool that has made my life a lot easier. And by a new tool, I mean an extremely old tool in the form of makefiles and things like them. For anyone who's not familiar, makefiles are ancient and are really popular throughout engineering workflows, where they let you define how a complex project actually comes together. The idea behind a makefile is that you're making your dependency graph explicit. You're writing down the outputs that you are expecting over the course of a workflow, the inputs that all those outputs require, and the commands that turn your inputs into those outputs. They solve this hard problem of keeping your dependencies straight in a really flexible way, and so they've been really popular for decades. The only problem with them is that they're awful. No one really likes writing makefiles because they're a really complicated format and they require you to understand your dependency graph entirely. The really nice thing is that in 2023, you don't actually have to write makefiles anymore. There are tools which will handle all of the hard parts for you. I'm an R person, and so I'm going to be talking about R tools, specifically the targets package for this. If you're in Python, check out SnakeMake, check out GeoWeaver. They do very similar things. But for R, there's this package targets, which lets you define the outputs that you're expecting. So this is an actual targets file that I actually use in my actual work. And all of those tar underscore target lines are outputs that I'm expecting to generate from this workflow. Targets looks at those expected outputs, it looks at what creates those expected outputs, and it automatically generates a dependency graph for you. You don't have to ever think about how these pieces relate to each other. It's all handled automatically. And then you can use targets to run your entire pipeline from start to finish in the correct order. Or if you make changes, to pick out what needs to get rerun and then execute only those pieces so that all of your results are staying always up to date. It makes it a lot easier to do things in a reproducible way and to show people how your entire project goes together. Now, I'm singling out targets for this rave because it's also, I think, like the pinnacle of open source development. There is an entire book on how to use it, which answers every question that you might have about how the pieces fit together. And out of the box, it also supports doing things in parallel if you've got outputs that don't depend on each other, and doing things over a network if you've got access to cloud environments or high performance computers that can benefit from doing that. So it's absolutely fantastic if you're an R user. Highly, highly recommend checking out targets. It's a really nice way to make your work more reproducible more easily. Thanks.
Right on. And yes, targets is a game changer. The dependency, the dependency graph, including code function level graph invalidation or graph checks is like, it broke my brain when I saw that. I was like, wow, this is so, anyways, it's good. All right. So I'm gonna, apologies, I am not a Zoom native user. So we're gonna do, I think, this. All right, you all should be seeing
Yep.
my introduction. Awesome. Okay. All right, so I'm Dave Blodgett. I am a civil engineer with a data habit. And I've been working in a space that's required me to have big thoughts, but also understand the minutia of how the things I do work. And I tend to come to a lot of these kinds of things with big thoughts, but then I quickly jump into, okay, how does that actually function? Why does that big thought, like what's the key that makes that architecture function, right? And something I've been thinking about a lot lately is in cloud. So over the last 10 years, this transition to a new economic theory of computing, which is cloud computing, has not been without casualties and not been without trade-offs. And my concern, or what I have a lot of questions about, is with the web and cloud transitions we've been going through, are we kind of letting our best economic intentions lead us to what is really a collection of walled gardens that are not doing what we want them to do, right? And so that basic question, I think, is worth framing in terms of fair data and what we think fair data is. And note that fair data is about findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability, where accessibility, does accessibility mean available? Or does it just mean that once you have permission to access it, or you have paid to access it, you can read it and you can understand what it is? I'm not sure. I don't actually know if the way that we've been implementing fair data is leading us to more available data and more, more egalitarian data systems. And to make that worse, this movement towards science data gateways, it's funny that this graphic was from page 1997 of a research. I had to blank out the 1997 because this little graphic down here and the general layout just made me think, is this really from 1997? I had to go look. It's from 2016. The science data gateway is a way to do computational science at scale it's opening doors to doing things we couldn't do otherwise. But it's also clearly a walled garden. You can't create a science data gateway that's not a walled garden, really. That's the whole point. And that is absolutely an anti-pattern. But it's an anti-pattern that has a purpose, right? All anti-patterns have a purpose. There's a convenience to it. There's economics to it. And by creating a thing that is exclusively available with certain capabilities to a certain group of people, we've now walled ourselves off from the rest of the community. So are science data gateways walled gardens? How, if that isn't an anti-pattern, or if it is an anti-pattern, how do we reconcile the fact that we're doing this in the context of fair and open data, right? How do those two things work together? And I think to extend this a little bit, we're seeing a move back to academic data hosting at the edge of the cloud. We're seeing a move back to infrastructures that people purchase for the long term so they don't rack up cloud bills and have the ability to distribute data for free. So the trade-off, the engineering decisions around cloud or on-premise are actually kind of rebalancing in some cases. And I find that fascinating. And I think it has a lot to do with this fair, available open data versus, big infrastructure that's available to a few, privileged users. So here are my questions. We need to better understand this space. From a big thought perspective, sure, we need to frame it, but we also need to dig into some of the details. How do we collectively shoulder this burden of data availability? How do we work together to make sure we're not leaving people out? How can science data gateways serve a role in a data commons? How do we make sure that a science data gateway, there is a community of science data gateways? How can they play a role in making data distributable across multiple data centers, for example, sharing information, making sure everybody has like common baseline of information that they're basing their research on? How do we bridge divides between the corporate cloud and institutional infrastructure? We've got all these HPCs with their big data buckets. We've got all these cloud providers with their big data buckets. And it's not clear to me that there's any really coherent syncing between them in many cases. There are some instances where it's happening, but for the most part, it's ad hoc. And it's not something that we're really institutionalizing at a web level, right? And so at the very end of it, at the core of it, I think this is my most specific, this is my final and most specific question, is how do we incentivize open data that scales and performs without forcing people like myself, who's a data provider within a federal institution, organization, a federal agency, without forcing those people to eventually pay the bill. And maybe that's what we want to do, but we as a community, we as a society need to say, hey, look, there's a group of data providers who are expected to pay the bill for data infrastructure. And it's a big thing that hasn't really been said out loud yet, I guess. So that's what I'd like to hear some more about this year. And I wonder if other people have similar curiosities. If I can figure out Zoom, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it along.
All right. So I'll just go ahead and get started here. My name is Doug, and I'm with the Ronin Institute. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the intersection of web architecture and semantic web. Just to give a little bit of context for what I'm going to talk about here, I want to go around these four blue dots here. And if you look at this image and you see things like foster and communicate and implement, you may think about things like GoFair implementation networks, and that would be correct, right? This is very much inspired by those types of systems, also by the semantic workflow and elements like that. In terms of the definitions, as we go through these, the only one I want to call out ahead of time with this is that of publisher, right? Because publisher can be overloaded and mean a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. And in the context of this presentation, I really only am talking about those people who are putting resources on the web. And in this case, what we're really talking about, right, is the publication of structured data information. This is, the schema.org and JSON LD with type data set that we utilize for people like Google Dataset Search or Data One or Geocodes or others that are utilizing these types of systems to pull data in. And so that's the only one that I really want to define before we go out. I couldn't make up my mind on a rant or a rave, so each one of these sections has a little bit of everything. So I'll start with the authoring and guidance, right? Because that's probably the one that we're the most familiar with, right? This is the kind of things that we're seeing coming out of scienceonschema.org and other areas like that. And there's a lot of things to rave about here. There's a lot of good vocabularies and good work that's being put forward. And I think that we have some really nice tooling available to us, especially now that we have access to all the JSON tooling. But The issue is that for many, this is their introduction to JSON LD and the underlying RDF data model. And I think if there's some rants that I could give, it would be that we really need a lot more introductory material to present to people and provide them a way to kind of onboard into that environment really well. I will call out one rant and one rave that's really interesting to me, and that is that I really don't much care for spatial inside schema.org, but I think that GeoSparkle is really cool, and I'm really excited for discrete global grids coming into the new version of GeoSparkle, and a hat tip to Nowhere Graph as a very good resource for working with GeoSparkle and geospatial inside graph environments. So let's talk about that publisher then next, right? One of the issues that we've run across in some of the work that I've done with both the Ocean Info Hub and Geocodes and some others is that people tend to have a little bit of impedance in trying to figure out how do I get that JSON LD into my environment. And this can be very difficult because they may be using things like WordPress or other environments where they don't really know if they how to do it, or even if they have that kind of control over that environment. And so this whole process of getting that JSON LD created and then into that web page can be problematic at times. On the Rave side, web architecture is a solid environment to do this with, right? You have a lot of scale, you have error handling, you have caching, you have all these great things that are available to us inside that web architecture. And there's a lot of good documentation in terms of the linked data platform and other environments to get that. So I would say that the one key thing I'd like to call out on this particular page, though, is that it consistently in the groups that I work with, we get to that point where they're like, yeah, this is a great idea. I want to publish this information. I want to use this mechanism to do it. I see how to align with the guidance that's being created, but I need to get my metadata out of my current environment as a spreadsheet, relational database, whatever it is, right, and translate it into this. And very often that's a one-off type thing. And so there's that problem there of, how do we help people get working inside this flow? I won't spend a lot of time on indexing because I'm kind of pressing up against the clock here a little bit. I could spend far too much time on this because this is kind of where I live, but I would simply say that there is some good tooling that's out there for this type of indexing. We need more of it. It needs to be better documented. We need a wider breadth of it so that it can match people where they are in terms of the skill sets that they have. If there's one rant I would call out at this is that our graph ecosystem is not, in my opinion, as well refined or as mature as things like relational environments or things like that. We have different types of graph environments, knowledge graphs, enterprise graphs, RDF, property graph. We have multiple query languages. We have non-uniform implementation of even things like Sparkle or things like that across different environments. Rant, right? So I mean, you can just keep going on and on there. But I think that there's a lot that is good in this section as well. So then the last topic I'd like to talk about is the users and communities. And I think this is a vital area, right? I see a lot of groups who now they're getting this community of providers that are part of this network. They want to get them publishing using the guidance. They want to get them indexed into a knowledge graph or things like that. But keeping them informed of what the status is, keeping an awareness of what their service status is in terms of just uptime and things like that is very difficult for them. And so I keep thinking about, is there some kind of customer, relationship management system style approach that could be used in this area of communicating? There are some cool things going on, right, with Go Fair implementation networks and things like that. There's good developer resources at jsonld.org, places like that. So lots of rants, lots of raves in that regards. So many left unspoken. And I would just give a shout out to the semantic adoption session. This was a fantastic image. I looked through this image. I almost thought about just throwing all my slides away and spending 5 minutes talking about these post-it notes, because literally 2/3 of these directly apply to a lot of the groups I'm working with. And I think this is a great resource to take a look at as well. So I'll call it done and say thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. And that was, can you repeat the session that was from?
Yeah, that was from the semantic adoption session, and I had put a PDF for there, and there's a link to this particular screenshot. So that was the one I think on Wednesday.
And can you introduce us to your friend?
Oh yeah, and this is Arvin. I had to hold him or else he'd be barking.
All right, thank you. Up next is Megan Carter.
For a little something different. All right, bear with me for a minute.
That's awesome. I invited Megan, actually invited Susan or Megan, and Susan made Megan do it. Because information technology, like Zoom is information technology that we use for communication. And the community relies on an awful lot of information technology to ensure interoperability. I don't want to pretend that this is a technologists only space. So take it away, Megan.
Thank you. And let me start my little timer. All right, so I'm ESIP's community director. This talk is going to be a little bit different. It's meant to highlight where we need your help. It is hard to stop and make space for thinking about some of these things, even though every day I'm thinking about these things. It's like very hard to take a break and think about some of these critical challenges of the technology that we use to collaborate, and think about meaningful changes and have the energy to make those meaningful changes. So I will remind you all that ESIP really is about people. We're not just about tools. And specifically, we as an organization want to help people to find their people, help them find other members of the earth science data community to work together on common data challenges and opportunities. And what we as a staff spend our time doing is trying to foster these rich collaborative experiences that allow you all to make these important connections. We don't want to just call ourselves a community of cool people doing cool things, but we also want to foster a sense of community. And that's more than just being a place to come or being a group of people. And to define this, a sense of community here is defined as a feeling that the members have of belonging, a feeling that they matter to each other and to the broader group, and a shared confidence that they'll find what they need by working together. So our tools and our staff should both help us move in this direction. You've probably seen this image a million times. The set of collaboration tools that ESIP offers is many and varied. And they all serve different functions, and they keep ESIP a configurable experience, which I think is a good thing. It allows people and groups to choose what they need, but it also means a lot of care and maintenance on the staff side. In some cases, big costs and lots of training needed to help people use them. Some are shared services that benefit our partners. ESIP maintains licenses and we make these tools accessible to them. We also know that some of our partners and sponsors restrict the use of some of these tools. And even at this meeting, there's been a bit of a different interpretation from some about which tools they can each use, even if they belong to the same organization. So having this diverse set of tools helps us in some ways get around it, even though it doesn't help us get fully past that challenge. There's always something that's latest and greatest. And while we want to be adaptable and in the know about what's new, we want to be really intentional and mindful of the pace of community. When we decide to make a change, it needs to be justified because it's the framework on top of which our community collaborates. So I wrote and rewrote this slide multiple times. It's going to come across as a rant grave and maybe a scattered set of thoughts, but this is just the beginning of a conversation. Here are just two areas with respect to our tech. I want to talk about our new customer relationship management system, or CRM, first. And I recognize this is not something as much that you all use to collaborate, but it's how we support you in collaborating. And I'm really excited that we're rolling out a new one very soon. It has new features like allowing community participants and partners to update their own profiles. But like any CRM, it requires a lot of care and maintenance also. It doesn't capture a lot of the qualitative knowledge that we all have about the awesome things you all are doing. So we have to make sure that we leverage it to capture more, and that we leverage it to capture information that we'll actually use to make the community better. At the moment, ESIP doesn't have individual membership, which means that a lot of individuals are moving in and out of our spaces, and this is flexible, which is good, configurable, like I said, but it means we aren't capturing much data about them. So we might be missing an opportunity to further engage with them. So the big question is, Should we collect more data? Should we be slightly more closed so that we can get that information and try to keep those people in our community? Or, is openness like the most important thing to preserve about ESIP? And now onto the hot topic of the ESIP wiki. This has been a long-standing ESIP sandbox. I remember I was very critical of it when I first came on board because it didn't look fancy and it was out of date in a lot of places, but it is a place for the community to create and manage their own content, to share the work of collaborations, to share meeting notes, to share lists of resources. It doesn't require the staff to act as gatekeepers in any way. We also conduct business there at times, like we post partner applications, we put candidate slates for leadership, and there's history. Dave and others, I think, referred to some history that exists there. Some of our federal partners have spun down their wikis or internalized them, and so they've expressed interest in moving content over to ours. Like with a lot of wikis, there is a lot of content that is out of date in many places there. It's not being used a whole lot right now. Some groups have, clusters and committees have moved to using Google Docs for their notes, and they share their resources in other ways. So we have to think carefully because what people don't know is the wiki actually costs us a lot of money every year, just in terms of maintenance, not in terms of enhancing any functionality there. I don't think we want to let it go, but we do need to think carefully about, how we will use it, encourage use of it, and kind of make sure that there are best practices for using it. And again, I didn't structure my thoughts too well there, but just highlighting that this is a critical area that maybe you aren't very aware of. So my big questions with all of our tools: where do we need to throw our energy into documentation and guidelines, recommended or even required ways of using our tools, versus where do we need to recognize a new and different need and think about making a change? And if so, to what? So I have exceeded my 5-minute allotment, but I just want to say, help us understand how you use the wiki, how you would use it now that maybe you're aware of it, what you think would be missing if we didn't have it. And this might mean more to our cluster and committee chairs than others, I will say. And then help us think more broadly over time, obviously not just right now, about what tools we need to have in ESIP versus which ones are just nice to have. And we thank you for keeping your ears and eyes wide open and remembering that from a community management perspective, we want to be really intentional and agile, obviously, but be careful to make meaningful changes when they're warranted.
Perfect. All right. And the chat is very appreciative of this topic, and so am I. I think especially the wiki. I had exactly the same feelings you did, Megan, and okay. I'm very interested to see where we might take that. So cool.
I guess I'm coming up next. So
yeah, take it away.
Right. Hi everyone, Doug Sra, research scientist with Corporate Institute for Satellite Earth System Studies and NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information. And I'm representing the data readiness cluster, talking about AI ready data and where we are right now. And some personal opinions. I will not go as far as Rave or Rants, because I grew up in a culture that don't really express opinion directly, and unless I'm not sober. And so here, everyone, it's all the hype about data science, AI, and machine learning, and in the data life cycles, data science life cycles, a lot of times people spend a lot of time processing the data and preparing the data for their data science applications. So in a recent survey that we found, more than half of the data scientists spend more than half of their time to work on the data for AI research and development processes. So with that, we as a cluster has been trying to define what AI ready data means, and there's 4 aspects from documentation to quality, access, and preparation. So for the documentation, that's really to increase data usability. That can be including the tools and software code, example codes to how to access and use those data. And for quality information, which is a really hot discussion topic about how we define the fit for purpose for AI and how that may affect the trustworthiness of the AI applications. For data access, the users really prefer a diverse version of the access points to those data, and how that may affect the efficiency and the reproducibility of AI research and development process. And for data preparation, which is quite unique for comparing to other type of analysis ready data, is that how to identify those common patterns of for the AI research developers may need different data services and tools to prepare the data so that reduce the burden on the user side and to directly using the AI application development process. So the cluster has representation from different agencies, private sectors, academia, although we could do better with private sector engagements. And so we have published our first version of the AI data checklist on the bottom right, that you can either scan the QR code or use go to the link to the slides. It's in the note documents. So as we have got some feedback about the AI readiness checklist, and we're trying to refine the checklist and then develop a community roadmap about how we can advance the AI ready data efforts. So the first component is to really develop and maintain the AI ready data standards, where in the short term, we want to review different common domains data standards, because to figure out what's the gaps and overlaps between the AI ready data efforts and the existing common data standards. And the medium term was looking at the moving to published standards, and then long term will be maintain those standards and how to update, have a governance structure. And the second component is the automatic assessment tools for the AI readiness checklist. So right now we have been using a manual spreadsheet assessment, which composed of 50 questions. And it's going to be really labor intensive to do assessment if we want to finish the assessment for all the data sets within just single data repository. So, and we don't really want to pile on those unfounded mandates for those data repositories, say this is another thing you need to do, but without any resources. So those automatic tools for the assessment would be really important. So we have the opportunity to talk with Matt on the fair assessment they did with the Data One and Arctic Data Center. So that's something we're really interested in to see how that a community can come up together with assessment tool developments. The third component would be the uplifting the current environmental data to the AI data standards. We're starting with a pilot set of the thematic AI data. We started with climate in the July ESIP sessions, and we're trying to working with different communities on those thematic data sets as well. And longer term would be using developing those discovery tools and services to help people to identify and discover those data sets that can be used for their AI machine learning applications. The last one is to sustain the engagement, because this is not one time and done thing, that because we all know the development of the AI technologies and the different data technologies are really evolving really fast. So that's really, we want to engage with the community to keep up with those developments. And so here are just some final remarks about for these 4 components, from standard to assessment to data and services and the engagements. The key pain point right now, or challenge right now, is to balancing the common AI readiness with specific needs of applications and domains. So when we're talking with really specific developers or researchers who are using AI for specific applications, they're always saying the current AI readiness doesn't really meet all their needs, just because that they're really specific type of preparations or really specific things they want to see in that. But overall, we want to step back. And so there's one last mile problems between the common AI readiness and the final really specific AI readiness for those specific applications. So what we are trying to achieve is those the threshold or those common AI readiness for across a different type of data and different domains. And then that can be, we can further developing those add-ons to the AI readiness to make sure that can fit specific domain needs. That may be a long-term steps to do. And then right now we're in this process to understanding the overlaps, and also more importantly is to identify the gaps between the existing standards and the existing data service, data tools that versus the AI ready data requirements. So if there's already things that can be leveraged, there's no point to really reproduce or regenerate from the beginning. The last step is to address the really rapidly emerging technologies in the AI machine learning. So in the computer science, different models are pumping out every month and every conferences. And so, when we're talking about standards, that's a slow process, or at least slow evolving process. And so how can we balance in those rapid development in the technology and those standard development life cycles? That's something it's always challenging to think about. So I'm just going to stop here and then be really happy to have further discussions in this session.
There's a lot to think about. Good, thank you. Especially want to get into the interactions between AI-ready data and some of the other things we've been talking about. I think there's some interesting intersections there. So last but not least, we have Matt Jones with so many toothbrushes. I can't wait to hear what this is about.
Hey everybody, thanks for inviting me to be part of this session. I'm Matt Jones. I'm from the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And at NCs, as we're called, one of our primary missions is to do ecological and environmental synthesis, where we focus on the integration and sort of cross-cutting analysis of large-scale ecological data to address problems that are of societal need. And so interoperability and data integration are really a fundamental part of our mission and our reason for existing. And it's been over the 25 years that I've been working in this area, it's been really a pleasure to see all the incredible integrative stuff that people and scientists have been able to do. But it's also frustrating in the sense that building interoperability tools that helps facilitate that has always been a challenge. And we've tried to build frameworks like Data One, which is one of the networks for data sharing that we've been involved with. And largely building a framework for interoperability like Data One or many of the others that exist in the ESIP community is about dealing with just so many different technologies and choices. And so this talk's a little bit of a rant, really quick, and then hopefully a little bit of a rave right at the end. So, you know, there's this parable that's been around forever. It's really kind of challenging that frameworks are like toothbrushes. Everybody has one, but nobody wants to use someone else's. I did a little looking into this. It turns out this comes from the psychological sciences or the social sciences, where people were really talking about everybody's pet theory about the world. But it's really been adopted by and taken over by the tech world and thinking about, you know, so many standards. So much so that, you know, there's this XKCD comic, you know, about standards and standards development. I think this might be the most common image you see at ESIP talks anywhere. Like, it's probably repeated so many times I can't even imagine it. So I'm sort of filling right in with that sort of approach. But it's true, you know, the reason that we have those sort of like cliches is that there are so many ways of doing the same thing. You know, this is a great figure from Jen Riley, who put together this visualization of metadata standards, of which there are many, many hundreds. And if you really want to get into the metadata world, you really need to dive deeply into at least dozens of these. And yet we find that individual communities tend to focus on one or two and don't really necessarily have that breadth of perspective on the metadata world that would really help with interoperability. And it's true of other things too. You know, you look at things like big data formats. We've got tried and true data formats like NetCDF, HDF that have been around for a long time. But you also see, you know, lots of evolution of new data formats that are coming around. And these different things come up for good reasons, like, you know, optimizing data access and having cloud-ready data. These are all really good goals, but they also contribute to the proliferation of data standards and other sorts of things that everybody has to deal with. You have the legacy stuff, you have the new stuff, you have the cutting edge stuff that's going to eventually fall on the floor, and we have to deal with all of it. Same thing with infrastructures. Like, if you look at repositories, these are 9 repositories that are funded by the National Science Foundation. I can say that we probably have users that use all 9 of these repositories, and they all have highly overlapping missions and very different infrastructures to implement largely the same set of features and functions. And that kind of redundancy is part of the challenge and part of the problem that we need to bring together. And of course, these 9 are only a small subset of the microcosm of a much larger number of repositories in the earth and environmental sciences. Re3 data shows, you know, hundreds or thousands of repositories that are implemented that it would be relevant, that we need to work across in order to really build an integrated system. And this trend towards, so many different standards and technologies just keeps going on and on, from metadata editors to ontologies, cloud frameworks, workflow tools, machine learning tools and algorithms, et cetera. And so every area you look at, there's just a plethora of things to choose from. So my question is, how did we get here? I think that everybody likes to sort of think that maybe this is a not invented here sort of syndrome, but I don't really necessarily think that. I think most people that are working in this space, especially people in the EZIP community, come at this with the best of intentions and are trying really hard to work together on shared sorts of solutions. And I think the problems are much more structural. They're about some of the ways in which programs and things are set up. So we overvalue novelty, we undervalue maintenance. We all have to benefit from some sort of keeping our reputations up. There's disciplinary issues. Of course, there's agency and organizational silos and divisions. And then there's the ever-present competition for funding that drives us down different lines. And so the little bit of a rave I have is that basically I think that ESIP is the solution to many of these types of problems. I think our ability to come together as a group to collaborate openly, to value maintenance, to build up a community and to seek interoperability is really the right sort of thing. And so I'm sort of asking for a little bit of a plea where people find the time to really invest in the ESIP working groups that are building on solutions together instead of in our own agency or institutional or project or research program silos. I think it's really how we make a forward progress on this crazy panoply of toothbrushes that we've got in the world. All right, well, that's it. Thanks.
That is a fantastic final note, because I think it, anyways, that has me thinking about a lot of things. And the chat is lively. This is great.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that.
Sky is suggesting a modular approach to toothbrushes. All right, well, I want to start by just thanking, so thank you everybody for a lot of deep thoughts, but also some really specific useful things to think about. We've been capturing a number of notes. If you want to go in and add the people that presented, if you want to go in and add your key points, if we missed them in the notes, that would be in order. But from here, I guess we're more or less on time. We've got another 40 minutes. If we run out of steam and don't need to take the rest of the time, I'm not against that. But yeah, so Mike just put the Google Doc in the chat. My hope is to use the questions I've posed just below our speakers' notes as leading conversation to really try to identify topics and even specific presenters, specific things that we could talk about and maybe work on that people are hearing from what you just heard. I certainly have some ideas, but I will stop and open the floor to kind of whoever wants to jump in and start the conversation.
So, hey, this is Sky. One challenge I'm having sort of locally in my current job is the same old, shiny object syndrome that we always run into, where people find something and they go, holy crap, that's going to solve all of our problems. We just need that, and that's going to get us somewhere. And so I've been trying to figure out a constructive way of directing that enthusiasm to help us get to a little bit more, deliberate wading through all of the different tech options that we have to get things done. And I've been thinking about a pattern, that would involve, certainly having those, presentations and discussions and sort of, seeing some of the different things that are out there, but kind of dedicating somebody with a little bit of time to bring together a more critical look at, well, okay, that's cool, but how would it fit into this thing that we're trying to do? or how wouldn't it fit? And, how might we, examine alternatives, in a different way? Like I've got folks that are all fired up about the open data cube stuff right now, and they're all, excited about all these things that it can do. And, it's the standard, oh, well, it's going to solve all of these problems. It's like, well, okay, no, but it's one piece of the picture. How do we use it in some way? So, I mean, I've been thinking about, could we have this sort of dual track for these kinds of discussions that the IT&I stuff has done, where you have big open things where we invite people, or people come up with their stuff that they want to bring forward and share a new tech. We do work to beat the drum and get a bunch of people to those conversations that need to be there. But then at the same time, we also follow up from each one of those. Don't just leave it at that, but follow up a little bit and say, all right, well, who wants to come together in a brief synthesis group for, an hour or two following one of these kinds of things, who has a real interest in it, and, produce a little bit more of a thoughtful white paper or something out of it that says, here's some things that fit, here's some things that don't fit, that we could actually take into those next conversations and figure out where they're going to go. And I mean, part of my motivation is to sort of deal with that shiny object problem that comes from manager types quite a bit, who say, well, hey, so-and-so was able to get this fantastic thing done, we just need to use that. And being able to respond to that and say, well, hey, we actually got a group together of experts, and we looked at it and we thought about it, and here's what we came up with, kind of thing, would be helpful. So I don't know exactly how that could look, but some sort of a flavor to take these things and not just leave them hanging, but go to the next level just a little bit and see where we might head with it. That's been one of my thoughts lately.
I come back to this analogy of science as a composting project, where we're building a soil. And I think all too often we do finish a project and forget to plow it back in, basically, where we finish an activity and don't add it to the heap. And that resonates. So.
I think I agree with Sky to some extent, especially with AI ready data. Now everyone is talking about it, or ML ready data. And Tyler on the call, she actually has a brilliant point that so sometimes can use those like shiny object effect, trying to improve the things that we already need to get things done, modernizing data management, because oftentimes AI ready data is about data management. How can we modernize the data management practice to make it use the shining objects to get more support, like to do things that we're supposed to do anyway. So that is something I think we are aspiring to do with AI ready data. And especially, we don't really want to create additional burden to data managers if there's no additional support to help them to do that, right? If we say this is new standards everyone need to follow, and without any support, then it's just going to be on the list that they will never be able to do it at some point, because it's another thing they have to do. And so that's why we think those like additional tools can be helpful, or those automatic process can really be need to be like developed to help them.
So I certainly want to have the Targets author's name. I'm blanking on his name. The guy that wrote Targets.
Oh God, Will Landau.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's not maybe a couple of people we could, I guess, try to bring together around what you just said, Douglas, is of like this. What are the key modernized data management practices that unlock some of these next level kinds of data arrangements that we all want to take advantage of? And it's not just for AI ready. I mean, the data cube topic, everybody and their brother is excited about publishing cloud ready data cubes, right? And there's an awful lot of evolution in that space, just the same as every other kind of boutique data space. So that can certainly be a topic, or that better data or modernized data management practices, I think, is certainly a topic I would consider high priority. Anything else? I mean, so we've got these topics. I mean, what are there things that from the presentations, you can scan up to the notes, are there things people thought really stood out? Rob?
I see Rob.
Yeah.
Well, I like that Makefiles actually got a shout out, because I find myself going back to that kind of dependency graph model so often. It's so succinct in terms of being able to describe things in terms of a chain of events without being like explicitly showing the graph and showing those connections. And I also agree with the point. One of the things that I've discovered with workflows that's really tricky is not only are you having to connect the outputs of one node to the inputs of another, is you have to figure out how do I ensure that I can transfer completely large result sets, large chunks of data between one element and another without creating a whole big mess of files sitting around on a block store. And so that's always a real tricky problem, especially when you have really decoupled systems. How do you do a proper handoff of really large chunks of data?
Can I follow up on that one, Doug?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the workflows thing is a great example of this challenge with so many standards. Makefiles are the canonical dependency tool, and it's wonderful. Everybody wants to use them, and we all still depend upon them on so many platforms that we're unaware of. But nevertheless, I think they do have their challenges, like most of the technologies invented in the 70s. They're a little long on the tooth, and lots of people come up with new ways of doing the same idea better. Targets is one great example of that. Snake Make out of the Python world is another example. There are dozens. There's an entire ecosystem of scientific workflows that people have started to build. So starting with things like Chimera, then onto Pegasus and the Condor distributed, virtual data graphs. You've got, much more modern systems as well coming up, like Galaxy. There's the whole, modern bioinformatics workflow tools. Then the notebooks are merging into that space. So there's just this plethora of tools that do dependency management. And I guess I wonder how we come together as a community to pick our way through it. Some of them focus on simplicity, like Targets works great within a local environment if you're working in R. Some of them focus on like high performance computing, like how do you build a workflow that basically can move many terabytes of data around across supercomputer resources. So something like Parcel, that's a workflow engine, has a very different set of use cases than Targets. And yet they're both that same basic thing. They're basically a dependency management system with a declarative syntax. And I really don't know how to get around this. I've counted 125 different workflow systems that are currently in use and have good use cases. And I'm not sure how to like what to recommend to people for different things they need to do.
Yeah, I resonated a fair bit, Dave, with your walled garden discussion on fair data and that sort of thing. And something that would be really cool to me would be to, I don't know, have a little bit more of a solutions architecture thrust at some level that is more about kind of the dynamic that we have to deal with so many times, which is going from the realm of the possible to the realm of the realistic to the realm of the actually get it done. And we have to move back and forth across that spectrum all the time. I mean, those of us who are in the solutions architecture space, and there are a bunch of folks here who are, and oftentimes when we're trying to build, big architecture for really big problems or a big set of use cases, there's just tons of stuff that has to come together in that and tons of factors that have to come in together. And no one institution is going to be able to do it in exactly the same way because we're all under different constraints and different worlds that we have to live in. But kind of really digging into that level of things, recognizing that maybe over the course of a solution's being in its life cycle, we might have 8 or 10 different technologies in the same families that all have to be plugged in there and then go away and plug back in and whatever else over that time. And figuring out how to compose that and deal with that over time is a challenge. And I think we need to develop, personal, institutional, and community skills in that space, maybe a bit more than we have focused on to date.
That is such a hard thing to get traction on.
Because it's too big.
No, it's just having that shared abstraction for shared infrastructure in many cases, or shared tools. Because everybody's coming from a different entry point, it's just so difficult to get to a place where everybody sees the kind of common value in something that can be reused. The analogy, Alistair Ritchie, the guy from New Zealand that I've done some standards work with, has this analogy about using standards is like mixing a drink. Like any idiot can decide to go make their own custom liquor because they want to make a special drink, but it actually takes an artist to use cheap booze to make a good drink. And like having an understanding of like, these are the ingredients I can work with because they're available and everybody else uses them is a valuable thing. And then understanding how to work within that's almost harder than doing your own original thing, right? I think that's a real challenge. And I saw Ethan in his hand up.
Hi, yeah, this is a little bit adjacent to some of the current conversation, but kind of back to the conventions and standards back and forth that's been going on in the chat, and Matt mentioned, I think. I guess I'm just always wondering, when should things be standardized, and when should a standard be developed from scratch as opposed to evolving from community conventions and existing implementations? And there's advantages to both. Starting from scratch is great because you can do new stuff, you can take advantage of whatever, and you have nothing to maintain from the old days. But going from the existing stuff can allow for engaging in a large, perhaps existing community and really taking out from there. So it's often, I think sometimes standardization gets done early, too early maybe. I guess I think it's hard to know when standards should be done in one way or the other, when conventions should be evolved. Anyway,
there's certainly some things along those lines coming at us pretty fast these days too.
Yeah.
A lot of new cloud standards that are recycling concepts and ideas that have been around for a long, long time in different technical architectures that
like Makefiles.
Right. No, I think that's actually, so this comes back to something, who made this point? I don't know. Doug, I think Doug was calling out the need for more kind of basic introductory material about structured data, linked data, right? And I think actually one path, I would propose, I guess, one path to helping people see this kind of common approach, the commonality across these diverse tools and capabilities, is to take a step back to the core concepts that underlie them, not necessarily the ISO standards that they rely on, but like, what's the anatomy of a makefile, and how does that relate to workflow tools that function in HPC or workflow tools that function on your laptop, right? Because there's some common components, there's some common architecture there, right? And that kind of introductory basic concepts many times is more it helps people form that intuition, I guess. Maybe that could be something we kind of encourage. We bring people to the table and encourage them, hey, help people build an intuition for this thing where you're way out on the branch and people need to figure out how to climb the tree a little bit, right? I'd love to have some of the kind of out there top thinkers and implementers come and give a down to basics talk, more or less.
I'm wondering, I've seen that Megan's had a hand for a minute now.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this is helpful, but you know, I'd encourage you to think that, first of all, the session is awesome. I just want to say that. But I encourage you to think about like who has been showing up to IT&I sessions and who you'd like to see there. You have some of the largest drawing, groups come together for these, and I think most of them are in watch only mode, but clearly has value because they keep showing up. So I think we should have another one of these inside one of those sessions because there was a barrier to access to being here today. And ask them these same questions about what would keep them coming back. I think IT&I has sometimes been a catch-all. It's a lot of work to maintain a webinar series. I have admired you, Dave, and others who've been at the helm. Like sometimes you're just scrambling to find a topic, and it has been a catch-all for like new partners who come in who say, hey, I have something cool I want to share. And I think that it's important that we have that option at times. But I love that you're trying to have a more coordinated or more themed or a more even deeper dive approach. So I wonder actually if you need a rebranding, that it's not a webinar series anymore, but call it something different that it will be, or maybe you get an alternating schedule of like, this is the month, kind of like Sty said, this is the month we actually really get in and do more than just learn what this is about. Or maybe there's like a succinct output of each session that's more than just the video, the recording of the webinar, but some kind of, I don't know, succinct something. I think Kathy Todd Brown in the Soil Informatics Cluster has done a really nice job of having not just a recording from each session that they have, but a really succinct set of, here's what we got out of this and here's what it's making us think about next. So yeah, I see your struggle of needing to kind of be broad and welcoming, but also want to get things done. All right, I'm done.
I have a colleague who he comes from a long career in hydrogeology fieldwork. And whenever I talk about iterative development, he's like, yeah, you're just accreting code. He keeps using this word accretion because he's a geologist. And I actually really appreciate that. And I want to, I guess, if we could form something of a series of seminars or whatever we call them, I like the idea of basically just renaming what we're doing to have a different purpose, right? To be more, I don't even know if accretionary is a word, but be something that we're growing more deliberately. I guess I'm hearing that notion coming from a lot of people.
And you need to share the work, because if we're going to do anything more than just be a webinar series, and even add a webinar series, this is a huge task.
Share the work and motivate the engagement. I think that's the hard bit. A lot of, and not just motivate the engagement, but give people a reason to make the space to engage. I think that's the other. I guess that's what I mean by motivate.
Since it's quiet, I'm just going to jump in. I have my hand raised.
Yeah.
So another thing to think about, just to echo what Megan just said, the diverse audience that this group may have. So thinking about the user and we have a lot of discussion about from developer side that what we want to see, and thinking about the user end, because information technology need to serve certain users, and so having their perspective would be extremely helpful about what information technology are helpful, because especially right now I'm looking at some of the data sets, and it's really hard for the users, especially who don't have those specific coding skills, to use that. So anything that the information technology can help address those gaps between where we think the data is perfect to how they can really get the information out of those data.
So the diagram that Doug uses, and Doug, I'm forgetting the four arrow. There's four circles connected by arrows. I feel like that that diagram is what you were just talking about, Douglas.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I would. Yeah.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, you know, it's interesting listening to the conversation, right? Because in some ways, you do think of things like fair implementation network. It's not per se that exact model, right? But the fact that we have, you know, communities of practice, right? These domains that are trying to do this, and many of these things that are being talked about in here seem to fit into those communities that are trying to do something, right? They're scientists trying to understand data, like Dallas was talking about. They're trying to agree upon what their standards are, what their tooling might even be, right? We're all going to use this particular workflow and stuff like that. Doesn't mean that someone else won't choose something different. They're trying to communicate those things, and they're trying to get together use cases, right, that can reflect how the information both has to be presented and consumed, right? And you know, that goes into things like training, that goes into agreement on standards and things like that. So it seems like there's both a model there that might drive some of the various things that several people have raised here, and that there are communities like that already in existence, right, that might be able to be engaged inside an IT&I type ecosystem and say, look, what is a workflow, and what are the pain points within that workflow? Those are the kind of things that may, you know, be useful topics for us to develop training on, or to develop webinars on, or things like that, whether they're things like workflows and makefiles and targets and things like that, or whether they're data models, or whether they're different types of environments. So
It's like a systems view of the community that you think. I guess I'm thinking about kind of roles and responsibilities and the technology that we use to share, more or less.
And it will be a mess, right? It's going to be different for all different types
Oh,
of
yeah.
domains. There's not going to be one solution that fits all. But the fundamentals might be the change. I think that was mentioned earlier, right? The fundamentals of, hey, you know, you're going to need workflows. Hey, you need to be able to communicate these types of things. You need to be able to assess standards and pick standards. You need to be able to monitor your network and make sure everything's still working. And how do you do those kind of things?
What fascinates me about that is, so for those of us who have been around this for a while, there is a super messy but pretty shared, I think, kind of community abstraction there, that to somebody who's coming to this new out of grad school or whatever it is, man, is it hard to figure all that out. And it is not, it's so not concrete. And maybe that's kind of a number of people kind of started to get at this. What's at the core of this that helps people understand how the interoperability arrangements we're building actually fit together. But I'll stop there. It's got a couple of people hands up. I see one, Belanca.
Oh, yeah. Pardon for, I'm actually halfway through this session I joined. Maybe I might have missed it, because I like to actually share a point, because the smooth transitions with the workflows with the students that we are working on in our classes, especially when we are trying to get like some particular data sets like soil moisture. I'm just like asking for help from everyone. We have this documentation from 2017, and there's a huge gap when they're trying to use it. We tackled GPM data. We created tutorials. So how to go from precipitation data, but I think soil moisture data to obtain for the non-specialist student, anyone to work, special student or a non-specialists to work on, there's a huge gap. So I thought of bringing the awareness down there. So maybe we can work together and fill the gaps. Am I off the tangent? Because I'm so sorry, I just got late little joining in, but I thought that's what I was fitting in. Sorry. Am I on the right track? I apologize.
More specific than we've all been in kind of big think space, more specific than we've been, but that's not bad. I think that at the end of the day, the problem you just illustrated is the kind of problem we're here to help solve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Could those be like a, for a columnist, you have somebody write in and say, hey, I got this problem, I got this situation, and then this group could actually put together some kind of recommendation. So you're actually addressing a specific use case or condition. And so instead of generalized advice, we're actually bringing our knowledge to address a specific situation.
Yes, correct. And just
yeah,
brought the awareness of, sorry, my voice is down today, I'm with COVID. So brought the awareness of one use case scenario with the students' experience. So just to bring that attention. So I'm not taking into a different tangent from the conversation, but bringing the awareness of one particular situation. Okay.
and that's so something the team I lead in the survey has been working on recently is building. We've been prototyping and building out a new sort of data catalog, and it's maybe not a new thing. It's just something we haven't done explicitly before, where we have a collection of data sets. We have a collection of things that can be abstracted as tools, so things that work on data, components for building workflows. And then we have a paired and integrated set of essentially notebook blog posts that are built to highlight specific use cases for the data and tools, kind of to provide the entry points to people to understand how it all works together. Because if you give the abstract, like here's a tool that does a thing, a person who just wants soil moisture data for their specific application may not even recognize the thing that's going to work for them until they see the example. And I think that's a key perspective or a key piece to all this that, I don't know, it's another layer to the communication challenge for sure. I don't see all the people. I feel like I saw another hand up. There's somebody wanted to chime in. Well, I have plenty of ideas here, and I feel like I actually have a reasonable plan. I think I want to do another one of these, but the focus of it be, so I'll kind of lay out a little proposal and see if anybody has any reaction. I'd like to set up another one of these as our next month community open call, and do the short rant rave talks as I'll have to think about exactly how to frame this, but basically talks about the 101 level introduction to something that's been implemented a million times in different ways to help people start to understand the kernel, I guess, of some of these things. So workflows, what's the basic, where did workflows come from with makefiles and all that? Data cubes, who was doing data cubes in 1980 something, and how much have we actually evolved from there? RDF, what's the kernel of that, and how can you actually see something familiar in a number of implementations? There's a handful of other things we could do. The wiki concept, like where did that come from? What's its role been over the years? These kinds of things that are really important to us. If we could get a group of people who really know the basics on those, that could come and give some kind of motivational talks to say, hey, here's the basics of what we're building as an IT system. Megan, your diagram of the components of I think you said ESIP's kind of communications platform. What that diagram is one of like 10 that we could create that has a similar diversity of components. But down underneath them, there's some core concepts, some core pieces that I think we should try to elevate. So I want to start there, and then see if we can tease out some really high level but deeper dive topics based on that engagement. And I guess I'm seeing some really common themes here, some really common ideas, and I would love to work on the wiki topic as our kind of where do we take the outcomes of these calls, is how can we vet, build, evolve a knowledge base of sorts that is something we can grow as a group, and kind of have a goal of each of the sessions being build on or improve an existing article, an existing page, an existing web resource, so that we as the ESIP community kind of are part of one of those blue circles on your diagram, Doug, where the part of the puzzle that we're contributing is the part that we can get together and talk about, right? Does that make sense? We'll get on board with that. Getting people to feel like they want to engage is still an open. I think there's an art to that, or an unknown to that I think you maybe just have to work through and think about. But
I think you just have to, well, to start, just be really clear about what your intentions are and what you're planning, and how we got there. And you're going to lose some people and you're going to gain some people, and you just have to be comfortable with that. But as the chair, like, it's good for you to set the direction and move in it and not be apologetic about that, as long as you're asking for input along the way.
Yeah, no, and this has been formative. I had some ideas going in to who I was gonna invite and how we were gonna run things and all this, and I won't lose sight of some of that. But at the same time, I think some of the stuff that people have brought up about kind of back to the basics stuff really resonates with me. I've said to a number of people that I feel like with all the new technology, all the new methods, all the new computational this, computational that, in many cases, people have lost sight of the 100 and 200 level concepts in their domain. and it really would do us all some good to kind of come back to those basics and see if we can apply some of the core concepts of our domain science in new and more sophisticated ways with these technologies. And I think that's been something I think about a lot, and I can see a lot of that in what people talked about today. So all right. Well, I'll definitely be following up with Megan and others on ESIP staff about the wiki thing. I'll work with Mike and others to think about the next IT&I webinar. I do want to, I guess I'll say it publicly because I've said it in other places. I do want these sessions to be, well, so I've really appreciated in my time away from the IT&I, I've really appreciated that the promotion materials for the IT&I have improved and they've looked better, and they're part of a system that's nicer, and that's evolved. And like I think that's been noticed. I've really noticed that, and I want to keep that up. I also want to keep up the production quality of these meetings, and like this one is, I feel like we've done a really good job of keeping the chat lively, keeping notes going, having good engagement on the webinar. Like I want to keep this production style similar and up our quality in terms of engagement and speakers. and use that as a goal, but also bring the topics that we've been talking about here and focus on building something rather than just sharing information. So. All right. Well, we're 3 minutes to the end, and we could all use a quick break. So thank you all for your time. It's been a really good session.
Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you everyone. And please join us for the networking coffee break that starts shortly, and then the state of ESIP and the peer recognition ceremony that starts at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And that should be a really wonderful celebratory way to close this out.
Awesome. Well, take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Take care.
Thanks.